Okay, so we're going to talk about equivalent fractions. And we're going to use, since we're all at home, some things that you have in the kitchen to talk about equivalent fractions. At the end of this lesson, if you want, if your mom or dad or whoever's with you says yes, you can go into the kitchen and do your examples of fractions with something you can find in the kitchen. But you can always draw on Classkick on the whiteboard too. So, equivalent fractions. Equivalent means equal amounts, or it has the same value. It doesn't mean the same numbers. It means that the value is equal, that the same amounts. And we're talking about fractions because it's what we've been talking about. Okay? So here I have my piece of bread. So since I'm using fractions, I have to use a numerator and I have to have denominators, right? Those are fractions. The number of parts I'm talking about, and my denominator, the number of parts in one whole. And we're going to say this piece of bread is one whole. So I have some pieces of bread that all came from the same loaf. So I know they're not perfectly rectangular, but they pretty much are the same size. All the pieces we're going to talk about. Okay? Since fractions have to be divided into parts, I'm going to cut my piece of bread. Bread is one whole, and I'm going to cut this right down the center. Okay? So let's talk about what that fraction would be. So this should be review here, right? So my denominator, let me use a different color. My denominator is the number of parts I have that are in one whole. This is one whole, I have two parts. My denominator should be 2. I'm only going to talk about one of the parts, so I'm going to take one of them away. So I'm only going to talk about one of the parts. But we knew that I had 2 to make up the whole piece of bread. So this is 1/2. I'm going to get another piece of bread, and my job is to make them be equivalent fractions. So they have to be the same amount, but I'm going to make them have different number of pieces. So the same total amount, the same value, if I shared them with somebody, they'd be eating the same. So I'm going to start by making what I had before, right? This is exactly what I did before. I cut them in half, right? So this is a half, and this is still a half. So I'm going to take this half away, but we know these two parts made a whole. So I'm going to take that half away. Okay, so now I have a half and a half. But I want a different fraction. I'm going to use different numbers, but it's still going to equal the same. Like if I gave this to somebody and this to somebody, they both have the same amount. This one, I'm going to change it, and instead of having them just the whole cut into 2 pieces, I'm going to have the whole cut into 4 pieces. Okay, so I took my whole and I cut it into pretty much 4 equal pieces. I know it's a little rounded over here than over there, but I have 4 equal pieces, pretty much. But I want it to be equivalent. That means equal amounts or value, the same amount here and here. So I'm going to take these 2 away, but I know that my denominator needs to be how many pieces, denominator is the number of parts I have in one whole, is 4. So how many parts do I now have that's the same value or the same amount as this piece of bread? That's only 1 part, but this one I have 2 parts. So if I offered somebody these or these, they're eating the same amount, right? I could put them on top of each other. They're the same amount. This is just cut into 2 pieces, and this is 1 piece. So these are called equivalent fractions, okay? So let's see if I can make one more equivalent fraction, okay? I'm going to put this over here. So I have my piece of bread. I'm going to start with what I did last time. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to start with it cut in half, right? So now I have halves. I'm going to do just what I did last time, and I'm going to cut them into fourths. Okay? Is there another way that I could still give somebody this amount of bread to eat? Remember, a half of the bread or 2/4 of the bread, but I can cut it into more pieces, right? So I'm going to cut each one to kind of triangles, right? Does anybody's, oh no, it tore. That's okay. We're going to have to imagine, and we're going to have to like smush back together. We're going to pretend I didn't just do that. Okay, so I'm going to cut this one, and I'm going to cut this one. Okay, let's see how my model turned out. I'm going to put it back together again. Okay, I'm going to get another piece of paper out so I can label. This time, I don't have 4 equal pieces. This time I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equal pieces. And that's a denominator, okay? 8 equal pieces. How many pieces am I talking about? I'm talking about what is equivalent or equal amount as this piece of bread. So I need to take all of these away, okay? I have to take these away. Now, what do I have? This is 1/2, right? They're originally 2 pieces. This one is 2/4. This one, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. That's the numerator, the number of parts I'm talking about. 4 pieces. So I would say these are equivalent fractions. 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4, and that is equivalent to 4/8. 1/2 is equal or equivalent to 2/4, which is equivalent to 4/8, because they all are the same amount of bread. They just are cut into more pieces. Okay, I'm going to slide these over because I'm going to do one more example. And this time I'm not going to start with 1/2. So I have 2 more pieces of bread that are equivalent, or they're starting the same. My 1/2s are the same. Okay, this time, let me slide off my extra pieces of bread. This time I'm going to cut my bread into thirds. Okay, I know this is rounded on the edge. We're going to pretend that my piece of bread is not really rounded on the edge, and we're going to pretend that they're all perfectly rectangular or square. Okay, this time my fraction was not 1/2. What was my fraction this time? Remember, let me move our cards over so I can see. My denominator is the number of parts I have in one whole. How many parts do I have that made up this whole piece of bread? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm only going to talk about one of them. So I'm going to move these aside. I'm not going to talk about these. I'm going to talk about my one piece. 1/3. This is 1/3 of a bread. Okay, so I have a new piece of bread right here. I'm going to do the same thing that I started with the other one. I'm going to cut them into thirds. I'm going to cut them into thirds. Okay, but if I only talked about this one part, that would be the same exact amount of pieces, 1/3 and 1/3. Those are obviously the same. So I have to do a little more cutting to make them be equivalent fractions, equal amounts, but they're going to be different number of pieces. So I'm just going to take it and I'm going to cut all of them, all my 3 pieces, in half. 3 into 2 pieces, 3 times 2 is 6. Now I have 6 pieces, right? My denominator, this is from my last example that I wasn't talking about. My denominator is the number of parts I have in one whole. How many parts do I have that make up one whole? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 parts made up my one whole piece of bread. How many parts am I going to talk about so that it's equivalent or the same as this? So these are the ones I don't need. Okay? How many parts do I have that are equivalent? I have 1, 2. 2. So 1/3 is equivalent to 2/6. Okay? So you can do the same thing with something in your kitchen, but I'll give some more directions. Remember, equivalent fractions, they have different numbers, but they equal the same amount. They might be cut into more pieces, but it's really the same amount of bread.